and spend. Most spending bills come to the floor prepackaged in a manner that makes it easy as possible to advance the government spending program and their agenda, and as difficult as possible to make spending cuts. Again, it's not a new problem. And if we're serious about confronting the challenges that lie ahead for our nation, I think the current structure is inadequate. Today, I'd like to suggest a new approach. Let's do away with the idea of comprehensive spending bills. Let's break them up. It would encourage scrutiny and make spending cuts easier. Rather than pairing agencies and departments together, let them come to the floor individually to be judged on their own merit. Members shouldn't have to vote for big spending increases at the Labor Department in order to fund the Health and Human Services Department. Members shouldn't have to vote for big increases at the Commerce Department just because they support NASA. Each department agency should justify itself each year to the full House and Senate and be judged on its own merit. For decades, the word comprehensive has been used as a positive adjective here in Washington. But I'd respectfully suggest that those days are behind us. The American people are not well served by comprehensive. In an era of trillion-dollar deficits, we need a tighter focus, one that places emphasis on getting it right and less emphasis on getting it done quickly. And don't assume that I'm singling out the appropriators, because I'm not. Over the decades, in my view, the authorizing committees in the House and Senate have abdicated their responsibility, often authorizing billions of dollars, knowing full well they'll never actually be appropriated. Interest groups then lobby Congress to fully fund the program, systematically creating pressure on the legislative branch to drive up more spending. I think it just has to stop. Authorizing committees should be held to the same standard as the Appropriations Committee. Authorize what we can afford and hold agencies to account for results. We should also consider developing a cut-as-you-go rule that would apply to any member who's proposing the creation of a new government program or new government benefits. And very simply, under cut-go, if your intention is to create a new government program, you must also terminate or reduce an existing program of equal or greater size in the same bill. Just this week, the majority leadership brought 85 different suspension bills to the floor on one day. Now consider this. 85 separate bills under suspension to the floor of the House. Many of them creating new government programs, some of which have never been held up to any scrutiny or any light of day. Now, if we'd had this cut-go rule in place, roughly half of these 85 bills would have never made it to the floor. Cut-go was conceived by my friend and my colleague Roy Blunt from Missouri. And as he put it, and I'll quote it, let's turn the activists for big government on each other instead of letting all of the activists gang up on the taxpayer. Through this public discussion, we might end up finding that neither program has a whole lot of merit in the first place. That may sound simplistic, but sometimes that's the best place to start. Of course, no amount of spending control can substitute for the critical role of oversight. And we should direct every committee to make its oversight responsibilities a top priority and to make no apologies for it. Both parties should work together to ensure that each program is meeting congressional intent and serving the national interest. And Republicans shouldn't start from the assumption that all government is bad, nor should Democrats start from the assumption that all government is good. Oversight, I think, should be conducted under a uniform standard. What's the purpose of the program? What's its responsibility? Is this the best use of taxpayers' time and money? Of course, if we're truly serious about being responsible again on spending, we need to do something about earmarks. As we all know too well, earmarks are the often questionable spending projects that are slipped into bills with little or no oversight. They run the gamut of bridges to nowhere, monuments to me, sewer projects, art exhibits. They ride on authorization bills, they ride on appropriation bills, they ride on tax bills. And there's an entire lobbying industry that's been created around earmarks alone. And I've watched it develop over the 20 years that I've been here. They've become a symbol of a spending process that has broken faith with the American people. House Republicans voted to stop this process this year on our own, without cooperation from our colleagues across the aisle, so we could begin reforming how Washington spends taxpayer money. Like the decision to adopt the moratorium in the first place, the future of the moratorium will be a collective decision made by our members. But on the question of earmarkings, my colleagues and my constituents know where I stand. I told my constituents in 1990, if you believe it's important to have a representative in Washington who will go there and raid the federal treasury on your behalf, you should probably be voting for someone else. I've never had an earmark. I have a personal no earmark policy the 20 years that I've been here, and I always will have. But I believe it's our obligation to end earmarking as we know it, and to bring fundamental change to the manner in which Washington spends taxpayer funds. And I'll continue to be an advocate for reforms to ensure that that happens. One of the reasons we do not have a functioning civil society in the House is that our efforts are geared towards catering to the individual member instead of focusing our collective responsibility to govern. The rules are too often manipulated to shut down debate and protect individual members from tough votes. In recent years, and not just under the current majority, the minority has been forced to use the motion to recommit, often in ways that are painful to the majority, to ensure that the minority has at least some voice in the debate. And in turn, the majority has responded by conjuring up new ways to shut the minority even further out. Now, this is nothing more than a cycle of gridlock. Here's my question. What are we so afraid of? The more we do to avoid risk and protect our members from tough votes, the more ineffective and polarized the institution becomes. The House was designed to reflect our natural contentiousness as a people. I think it's the genius of our system. So instead of clamping down even further, it's my view that we should open this process up and let the battle of ideas help break down the scar tissue that's been created between the two parties. Yes, we're still going to have disagreements, but let's have them out in the open. Yes, we're still going to try to outmaneuver each other, but my goodness, why can't we make it a fair fight? Instead of selling our members short, let's give them a chance to do their jobs. Let's legislators legislate once again. I've often said we've turned members into voters. They pull out their voting card and they vote, and that's about the extent of their involvement in the House. And again, structure dictates behavior. More debate, more amendments will mean more intense scrutiny and ultimately better legislation. And just as we've shielded our members from tough votes, we've also enabled them to write very bad bills. With all the challenges that are facing our nation, it's absurd that Congress spends so much time naming post offices, congratulating sports teams, and celebrating the historical figures of the past. Now, I know the drill. Members get good press at home, and leaders get cover while they're stalling on the real priorities facing the Congress. But often these resolutions are poorly drafted, duplicative of previously considered bills, and under both parties, they've received little or no oversight. It's my view that we should consider taking all these commemorative moments and special honors, and let's handle them during special orders or 1 minute at the end of session. I think it's time for the Congress to focus on what the American people sent us here to do. And the ultimate measure of whether we have a functioning House is not bipartisanship. Our focus should be on working across party lines for its own sake. The true test is whether our ideas, policies, and values are able to stand the test of a fair debate and a fair vote. And sadly, that's something we've not seen in the House for some time. Of course, it's hard to guarantee a fair debate when the majority has the ability to change bills in the dark of night and literally drop them into the laps of the minority just hours before the debate is to start. Without transparency, lawmakers cannot hold each other accountable, and the American people cannot hold us to account. And that's why in the Pledge to America, we say that all the text of all bills should be published online for at least 3 days before coming up for a vote. No exceptions, no excuses. But this lack of transparency speaks to a larger problem where the Speaker's office has the capacity to unilaterally draft a bill and send it straight to the Rules Committee. Woodrow Wilson once said that Congress in session is Congress on public exhibition, while Congress in its committee rooms is a Congress at work. If President Wilson went from committee room to committee room today, he'd probably take that statement back. Because the truth is, the much-needed work of the committees has been co-opted by the leadership. In too many instances, we no longer have legislators, we just have voters. In my view, if we want to make legislators legislate again, we need to empower them at the committee level. And if members were more engaged in their committee work, they'd be more invested in the final product that actually comes to the floor. From 2001 to 2006, I had the privilege to chair the Education and Workforce Committee, and the ranking member of that committee was George Miller. Now, no one's going to confuse me and George Miller for ideological soulmates. I think most of you get that. But in just a few years, we were able to work together to transform our committee from a backwater panel that nobody wanted to be on to the center of some of the biggest issues of the day. By focusing on our work, letting our members be legislators, and setting high standards, we were able to elevate the committee to its proper role. And there's no reason why every single committee in the House can't achieve the same thing. And for those of you that have watched this for a while, you know that for 50 years it was the most partisan, nasty committee in the Congress. Now, while George and I did agree early on that we could disagree without being disagreeable,